Scientific thinking, again, I mentioned, is the engine for continuous improvement. What we mean by scientific thinking, and I came up with this definition with Mike Rother, again, who wrote Kata. First of all, it's acknowledging limits to what we know. So we know some things, we don't know others. We think we know what the problem is because we looked at the data, but we haven't really gone to the floor to observe the process or observe it long enough to really understand all the variations, all the different obstacles there. So I have to acknowledge whatever my level of knowledge is imperfect, and I can always learn more by observing, by thinking. I also, as a scientist, will assume that I don't know the answers. I don't know the solutions. There may be some things I know. I know, for example, that pull systems are something we're striving for, and I have some ideas of how to set up a pull system. For example, there's a tool called Kanban, and I may be very skilled at Kanban. So I have things I know, but exactly how the Kanban is going to work in this particular situation with these people and with this level of demand, I'm not sure until I try and run the experiment, run the tests. And then finally, I appreciate that sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. And when I'm surprised, for example, when I'm wrong, even though I thought I was right, I have a good opportunity for learning. So whenever there's a gap between what I think will happen and what happens, that's how I learn. A great summary of scientific thinking was provided by a scientist who said, what if you needed to summarize scientific thinking in one character? And he said it would look like this, a question mark. So having a questioning mindset where you're always wondering is the basis for scientific thinking. Now, notice we're not talking about scientific thinking as being having a PhD and being in a lab and under very controlled conditions running experiments. We're talking about very practical scientific thinking with sort of a minimum that I realize I don't know everything. I realize I don't have all the solutions, and I'm willing to test my ideas and go and see and learn what happens when I run the experiment. And one thing you don't want to do that's not scientific that many people do with lean is they might map out the process. There's a tool, current value stream mapping, and I might map the current state and see in the map a lot of waste. And then I take out my hammer and I'm trying to beat down the waste with the one tool I have, which is waste elimination. This will lead to certain types of improvements, but they'll be scattershot improvements, and they won't connect with your purpose, with your strategy, with your goals. And it's more like a game we play in the United States called whack-a-mole, where you whack down a mole and then another mole appears someplace else. So every time you eliminate a waste, while you're doing that, there are other wastes appearing in other parts of the operation because things are always changing. So it's a losing battle to try to improve through waste elimination. What you want to do is to have a vision, a goal, a challenge, and work in the direction of that, recognizing that you're not going to get there in one step. It will take many experiments, a lot of trial and error. And continuous learning, as I mentioned, the Deming cycle. Dr. Deming was a quality guru in Japan, and he talked about plan, do, check, act, where the plan is understanding the current condition, understanding your goal, understanding what you think might solve the problem, so your initial ideas. Then the do is running the experiment, try it. Then the check is to check what happened when you ran the experiment, and the act is to reflect on what you learned and start to think about what you're going to do next. Unfortunately, most of us are not really good at scientific thinking naturally, and we tend to be impatient and want to just do things. And we feel a need to get quick results, and also a need for our egos to assume we know. And unfortunately, our brain is limited. We can take in an incredible amount of information, but our conscious minds can process a tiny, tiny portion of that. So we are limited, and what we have to do is to focus our attention on something very specific, but our tendency is to assume the 40, 50 bits of information is representative of the 11 million bits of information, assume we know more than we do. So we take shortcuts based on biases, something we've tried in another company that worked there, and that's become the tool in our toolbox, and we pull it out whenever we see a similar problem, even though the problem's really different. So how do you overcome that natural tendency for people to assume they know, to assume that they have the answers? And the solution to changing the way we think, just like changing our skill level for, say, sports, is to practice. And what Mike Rother did was to develop this 4-step improvement Kata model, again, similar to what Mr. Oba did, which he learned from Teiichi Ono. Again, the direction, challenge, the current condition, then establish a short term, maybe a couple weeks out. Here's what we want to accomplish in the next 2 weeks. We want to get to this point. And then rather than just do a bunch of stuff, try your ideas one by one, running experiments and reflecting in each case on what you learned. So this is the model. And the Kata idea came from the martial arts, where you're learning this incredible level of skill like karate, where you might be small compared to the person you're fighting, but you can still beat them in a fight because you have so many different skills. And you learn these skills little by little, one by one, practicing them over and over again until the master says, okay, let's go to the next kata. And kata by kata, you develop the fundamental skills required to fight. And we call this the iterative learning process. It's the same thing over and over again, repeated until you get better and better and develop the skills. It's the same way you learn piano, learn to be a great cook, learn to be a great football player. And for each of these steps, Mike Rother developed kata, or practice routines. In step 1, try these things. And that's in what's called the Chitta Kata Practice Guide, which is mostly visual, and it's teaching you the practice of how to develop scientific thinking skills. And the important insight that Mike had was that he was trying to develop a mindset, which is how we think, but you can't directly influence the way we think. If you tell me stuff, and I believe something different, I will automatically resist whatever you tell me. In fact, when I resist, my beliefs will be even stronger. So when you try to change my beliefs, and what you're actually doing is strengthening my beliefs, and I dig in and I become more stubborn. What we can do is we can influence people's behavior. So if we can make people act more scientifically through kata, through practicing, then they will start to think more scientifically, which will lead them to behave more scientifically, which will lead them to think more scientifically, and you'll get this virtual cycle. So the kata, really starter kata, to start this process. And what we're really focusing on is not thinking, but behavior. And one of the things that I've worked on for many years is playing classical guitar, and I have a teacher and I have lessons every week. And one of the things that my teacher always tells me, if I'm playing some a new piece I'm working on, and I make a mistake and I keep going, he says, stop. Every time you play that wrong, you're getting better at playing it wrong. That is, your behavior is causing your mind to think that the wrong way is the right way to do it. So when you make a mistake, stop, practice that one part of the piece, that one measure. He says 5 times in a row until you do it perfectly 5 times in a row. There's a storyboard, a visual for the kata, which simply reflects the model I showed you. So the learner is filling out information on this board by hand, and then meeting with a coach every day. We recommend 10 to 20 minutes a day. So it becomes just one part of your day, and then you go about the rest of your business.